Hello and welcome to the IGE Talks. I'm one of your hosts, Brandon Bilski. I'm on the board for IGE and I'm here with Chuck. Chuck, why don't you introduce yourself?
Chuck Neller. Been doing this IGE talks for nigh on to 20 years, not quite. It was with the Bush second um, second Bush election, and we were using VHS tape back then. So we've come a long way. And Brandon is the one who is the expert on Zoom. What IGE Talks is, it's just kind of a platform for people in IGE to express their points of view, occasionally invite in. Well, it's kind of open to the public. We used to have a lot more right wing types who had thoughts to express. They don't have so many thoughts anymore, but we're hoping they will grow some.
Lou, why don't we have you introduce yourself as well?
Sure. So my name is Lou Villaire, and I'm co-owner of Atlasta Solar Center here in Grand Junction, Colorado. But I'm from Michigan originally. Grew up in Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids, and prior to moving to Colorado, I was involved in some renewable and environmental activities in Michigan. I originally went to renewable energy engineering college in Michigan, and then also in environmental science at Western Michigan University. Went on and lived in Chicago for many years and worked in the oil and gas industry while I was in Chicago, as well as for the US EPA and Commerce Department. Moved to Colorado about 15 years ago, and at that time joined Atlasta Solar Center. At that time, the owner was a gentleman by the name of Virgil Bogus, and he had founded Atlasta in 1979. So it's a great story. He got inspired by President Carter and the early stages, if you like, of the energy transition at that time. It was a very different time then in terms of renewables because of course, with the energy crisis, there was an emphasis on U.S. energy production, and of course, Chuck is mature enough to remember those times, and a little bit before your time, Brandon. But that's okay. I'm sure you know that history. But at that time, renewables, at least for a solar company, was solar thermal, primarily air and water type systems. But as the technology has evolved over the years, the improvements in solar electric technology have meant that most of what's done now on a residential and commercial scale are solar electric systems. Although there's still quite a bit of solar thermal. We as a company, I'm always proud to say that we have solar thermal systems that we've maintained for 40 years. And in that period of time, you're going to do a fair amount of fair amount of maintenance, like you would on any type of mechanical systems. But that's how I came to be here with Atlasta, and myself and a couple partners bought the business from the previous owner, and now we've got a couple other employees that are buying into the company. So we are an employee-owned company, and we have about 30 people now.
Just to start things off, concerning your business and how it's going, and especially with the changing market, how have you handled that transition over the years of kind of, do we go with a new type of solar panel, or do we expand, or what kind of like exciting technologies are on the horizon for you?
Sure. So in the business, sometimes we call it the solar coaster because there have been ups and downs, and it's the cyclical nature of the economy in general, but it's also the especially the cyclical nature of energy, if you like. I mean, we're not tied necessarily to the kind of traditional fossil fuel industries as it were, but throughout, going all the way back, as I mentioned, to the early 1970s, you had various incentives that were in place, and as those incentives were in place, and then they were not, and then there's new incentives and so forth. that's kind of been the solar coaster. We are at the point now, of course, where you guys know that solar energy, whether it's with or without storage, is the cheapest way to produce electricity pretty much everywhere in the world. And yeah, and we used to, the joke was that solar energy was the energy of the future and it always will be. Well, the future's here. So we're fortunate to have that. And what we see now is the tax credit in the US is still in place, and there, depending on the market and the utility, you might see some incentives, some additional incentives, but we're moving away from those to, at least with solar, to a fair extent. What we're seeing now with our company, I guess you asked about what are the changes on the horizon, is some years ago, we started familiarizing ourselves with electric vehicle technology and chargers and so forth. So now at this point in time, we install, own, and operate electric vehicle chargers. And of course, as part of the new Biden infrastructure proposal, it's they're estimating about 500,000 new uh, chargers in the U.S. Up from, we have about 50,000 right now. And in fact, Colorado is in the top 3 or 5 states for EVs and chargers per capita. So there's another, and this is not unusual. The main utility in the state of Colorado has a transportation electrification plan. Many utilities are putting those in place, either voluntarily or they're being required to by public utility commissions or state legislatures. So, for example, here in Colorado, the main utility, Xcel Energy, is going to spend about $100 million over 2 or 3 year period to put in electric vehicle infrastructure, provide rebates for people to buy electric vehicles. So we even took that a little step further because, as it happens, one of my partners here in the business used to own a dealership. So we've established an electric vehicle and hybrid dealership, and we're in the process of developing a new a property across the street from us to feature electric vehicles. We've been selling them for the last year or so, but primarily just doing it on to our current customers. And part of that was that's important, I think, in terms of talking about the renewable energy industry, is that historically, if you look at the development of solar electric technology, historically, you had, if you were remote with solar electric, you had to have battery storage. Well, we moved away from that to a large extent, but now with new rate structures coming into place across the country, it is going to make more economic sense for people to put in solar as well as storage. To put it in perspective, the solar panels pricing has come down 90% in the last 10 to 15 years. Lithium ion battery prices have come down 90% in the last 20 to 25 years. So it's kind of sometimes I call it a back to the future, because way back when, before you had grid integration with solar, if you had solar electric, you had to have storage as well. There's still a lot of remote homes out there that use the storage. But again, now we're going to see a resurgence of that because the reduced cost and the additional incentives for people to put in storage.
I'm trying to figure out if you're a dedicated capitalist here. I mean, it sounds like you're talking about all this stuff getting cheaper and cheaper. I'd like to read you something that Joe Biden said. I think it's yesterday. I wrote it down. This is not a plan that tinkers around the edges. It's a once in a generation investment in America. Unlike anything we've seen or done since we built the interstate highway system and the space race decades ago. I'm wondering, this is all talking about America, and is there a time when it would be appropriate for him to bring up the subject that it will require the whole human race and every country, just not just what's happening in America? I mean, I know it's politics, but is there any, um, well, just can you comment on that as far as?
Sure. I would say, first of all, that, as Biden's kind of indicated, the U.S. has lost some of its technological edge. And indeed, obviously, China has a different type of economy than we do, a centrally controlled one. But their commitment to renewables and to electrification of transportation far exceeds the United States, and they are quite a ways ahead of us there. And so I think we are, to a certain extent, we're playing catch up. But that being said, much more, in the very near future, there'll be approximately 200 gigafactories producing lithium batteries for transportation and storage across the planet. So that's, I think we certainly see ourselves in the context of the planet altogether.
Uh,
To answer your question whether I'm a dedicated capitalist, I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, that doesn't mean that I don't that I think there should be socialism for the rich or something like that. I mean, the innovations that take place in energy are driven by a combination of things. As I mentioned to Brandon earlier before, I like to talk about energy in terms of markets, policy, and technology. And all those really have to be in alignment for the proper things to happen. And that means that the right type of policy has to be in place, because if you have historical circumstances like we do in the United States, where fossil fuels receive tremendous amounts of subsidies and have so for the last century, do we have to remove all of those for renewables to take the lead? Well, obviously, the answer to that is no, because many of those subsidies are still in place. And in fact, renewables are coming down so quickly in cost, faster than most people predicted, and are overtaking slowly fossil fuels.
What do you think is then do you think the market, like what would happen if we got rid of the fossil fuel subsidies? Like, do you think we need to transition out of that because ultimately we can't have much more pollution from carbon dioxide for climate stabilization?
I agree with that, and I think most people would agree with that statement. So you had a couple of questions in there, and in fact, Chuck mentioned Biden. I like that quote that he had very much, and I agree with it. And I think Biden's probably got more vision here than sometimes maybe we give him credit for. But Biden has directed federal agencies to the extent that they can to eliminate or start reducing the fossil fuel subsidies, and there's a myriad of them, and all the way from our military presence in Saudi Arabia, protecting the flow of petroleum, to subsidizing roads for fossil fuel vehicles and so forth. So that's and most of those are really entrenched and largely invisible to us. But I agree with Biden. I think starting a comprehensive review of what kind of subsidies are in place, and yes, that will accelerate things, to be sure, but we can't wait, for those things to happen. We have to keep working. And in fact, part of, as I mentioned to you before, Brandon, our view is that it's transportation and power generation that are the lion's share of emissions. And so where can you get the quickest reductions in emissions for the least price, in the greatest amount? And I think the general view there is that that's power generation and transportation, and all types of transportation, not just passenger vehicles. And then we'd have to add to that agriculture and forestry and in construction and buildings and so forth. But anyway, at least what we feel like we can do and what our knowledge base is, it's solar, it's storage, it's and the electric vehicles and the hybrids and producing electricity from solar is where we can make our biggest impact.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Great. So as far as Biden stepping forward of where we were a couple months ago, and leading by example, apparently we're not we're not expected, or we don't plan to um, give away this technology to, third world countries or anything. But we have something to say that is, do what we say, not what we do. In other words, we can't kick this habit of fossil fuel one way or the other. If we phase out the fossil fuel industry, that's going to take money. We'd have to, pay them off. Retrain the workers and do whatever with the the Wall Street holding companies. So is there any? I notice we're in the middle of this century pandemic, and we can't even give away vaccines to the third world without some financing. COVAX, I think they call it. We can't do anything without money. Apparently, everything has to be equated to money. Is that? That's just my complaint. You don't even have to comment on it if you don't want to.
That's okay. I'm not sure what your
I'm not either.
question there exactly is, but I can jump here. I was looking at some of the other questions that Brandon has here, and he asked, how can we vote with our dollars to push towards sustainable living, and are there large organizations you follow to stay informed about climate change? Well, one organization that I think has been particularly effective, and you guys are familiar with them, but it's Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign. So they have successfully closed about almost half of the coal-fired power plants in the United States. And the remaining coal-fired power plants in the United States, let's just say it's 500-600 plus, something like that. At this point in time, none of those coal-fired power plants are operating profitably. And yes, Chuck, to answer your question, when it all comes down to it, it's dollars. It is, because even if you're a fanatic coal supporter, and here in where we live in Western Colorado, we have many coal mines here. Many of them have shut down. Some of them still operate. It's an anthracite coal. It's a harder type coal, but we have coal mines north of us, coal mines south of us, and many of our customers are involved in the coal industry. And obviously, there's a fair amount of retooling. One of our main sales and design guys right now, he's a journeyman electrician. His name's Charlie. As a matter of fact, they did a story on him. He spent a decade in the mines, in the coal mine as an electrician. And he said, he told himself, hey, I'm destroying my body and my health, and I got to do something different. And he took the initiative and trained himself in renewables, and he's been with us for some years now. So anyway, getting back to the coal-fired power plants is that, again, even if you're the most rabid advocate of coal, you cannot justify keeping those plants operational when it's going to cost your customers more than building a new wind farm or solar or even natural gas and producing electricity for less. So I think we're actually going to see an acceleration of the retirement of coal-fired power plants. As a matter of fact, I like to tell people that in the first 2 years of the Trump administration, more coal-fired power plants were retired than the entire 8 years of the Obama administration. So it has nothing to do with whether you like it or not. It has to do with the bottom line.
So there are some examples of where the bottom line is not determined by the market, but interventions in the market that could arguably not be considered capitalist or socialist in that respect. Like the idea that we need to maintain a certain value of oil to make it affordable for people to keep the trucks that currently run on oil running, and the need for drastic investment to be within the timeline of stopping climate catastrophe or runaway global warming means that we need to make those big shifts. And while we have big companies like Tesla and other great companies like your own doing that vital work on transportation, the Green New Deal, which has been labeled as a very socialist thing, could be even seen within a capitalist framework, but just the necessary drastic solution that we just haven't done over the last 40 years. What do you think about that take?
Well, it's interesting that the Green New Deal, from what I understand it, when it was originally sort of introduced and prior to it being, sort of blown up on Fox News and publicized and publicly defamed, uh, there's generally when if you would explain to most voters, regardless of their political persuasion, you would explain a program to them that the Green New Deal does and not call it the Green New Deal, you would find a majority of people support it. And that, I'm not just making that up, that's supported by real hard data. So I don't, I think, if you like, there's many, many, many aspects to the to Biden's infrastructure plan. I frankly feel like it's better for framing and for political purposes to call it an infrastructure plan as opposed to the Green New Deal. And here's the reality. Here's the political reality. If you want to push it further than where it is now, as part of, let's say, the infrastructure, Biden's infrastructure plan incorporates a great bit of the Green New Deal without necessarily calling it the Great New Deal, I think that's smart. I think that's good politics and it's good policy. Because if you're going to call it the Green New Deal and try and push it through, then forget about it. It's not going to happen. That's my view.
Well, the Republicans are very good at finding a few dismissive words with which they, dismiss the whole idea. They've been doing that for years, like political correctness. They invented that, and the cancel culture. It's just their snarky way of saying things is I don't know. Sooner or later, people have to, get tired of 3-word judgments on the future or the possibilities. It's just completely
Sure,
dismissing.
I'm with you, Chuck. There, I think that they're very successful in poisoning many good proposed. Like I said early on with the Green New Deal, people loved it, and then once, like I said, Fox News and some of the nitwits got a hold of it. They made it sound like a massive plan for socialism, and we've been hearing that from the likes of the same people since the 1920s. The same bullshit. So again, I would just go back to, if we can frame the Green New Deal as the infrastructure, as Biden's infrastructure program, and incorporate some of the best aspects of it, and make sure it produces jobs, and make sure it improves the infrastructure, and at the same time reduces emissions, then I'm all for it. So,
do you have any plans to be in a different industry, or what's the future look like for you?
Well, we're staying here as a solar company. Again, we just, as I said, we've been in business we're in our 42nd year, and I'd like to see 50 years here with the company. And I'd certainly like to see, as we're talking about, we're a licensed electrical contractor here. That's very important in terms of doing the solar, as well as installing the electric vehicle chargers and that type of infrastructure. So we see that growing pretty dramatically, and that will take up more of our efforts. But the solar part, continuing to do solar for homeowners and businesses and utilities, we see that for sure. The storage part of it, I think, is really key, in that I didn't mention this, but many utilities now are going to what's called a time of use rate structure. So that tends to push people in a position where where the in-home storage will start to make more sense from an economic standpoint. So we see that really, that market increasing. It already is to a large extent, and many more of the systems that we are doing for customers are including storage.
Is there
Um,
any tendency for consolidation, centralization of companies in your field? You know, like becoming bigger and bigger, or is it pretty much remaining like a cottage industry? I mean, is there a General Motors of solar power in our future?
well, that's probably that could be almost a topic for another conversation. But
Well, we are going to have solar panels on top of our cottages. So
oh,
really, do we need we
you
need
know that
financiers for that?
no, that's been up and down. I mean, there have been some large companies in the U.S. Like Solar City that have consolidated, but then in many respects they got too big, and they've since unconsolidated, if you like. The solar industry in the U.S. is primarily independent companies like ours, and I think we're generally pretty proud of that. We're not most independent companies are locally, uh, um, are local companies and hire people locally, and the money goes into the local economy, and that's generally true across the U.S. There's a handful of big companies like Sunrun, for example, that operate in major urban areas in most states, and that's good. They've got economies of scale they can work with. But again, our industry is largely driven by independent companies like ours.
So I guess kind of like a pretty broad, reaching question to maybe wrap things up here a bit. Just speaking to those who are either activists for climate change or trying to get into the field in solar or alternative energy, what would you like to say to them? What kind of words of wisdom or hope would you have for them? And uh, yeah, anything you want to leave us with?
Sure. So there's tremendous opportunities, whether you want to work in wind, in solar, in energy efficiency. That's a big part. We were talking about Biden's plan. My business partner builds Energy Star homes, and many of those homes have solar on them. We have a sister company that's an energy efficiency company. Biden's proposing to retrofit, I don't know, tens of millions of existing homes to energy efficiency. That really employs people. So, as home energy auditors, working for energy efficiency companies that will retrofit existing homes and that will make sure that new homes that are built are Energy Star. If you want to get in, if you want to get into the wind business, the single fastest growing profession in the US for the last several years has been a wind energy technician. You need to go to college for a year or two to get a position there. You can travel anywhere, you can live anywhere in the country and do that job and get paid $50 to $100,000 a year, make a very good income, have a great life. If you want to get into solar, what I would say, if you're in college, and I tell this in general, but if you want to get into sales in solar, that's a fantastic area that there's no real barriers to entry. You don't necessarily need to have any college background, but what you got to be able to do is you got to have good communication skills, you got to have good interpersonal skills, and you got to have good quantitative skills. So those are the main things. You can get those in college or you can get those elsewhere. working in sales is a great opportunity. There's a lot of hype about it, but it really is, the sky's the limit. We have our salespeople love what they do, and they make a lot of money. And I think that you don't necessarily have to want to make a lot of money. That's fine, but why not? If that's what you enjoy, and you can do good while you're making a good income. So.
All right, well,
Yeah, I just wanted to say we appreciate you taking the time.
Not at all. I
I
thank
know
you.
it's in the middle of the night out there in Colorado.
Well, it's a little earlier than you guys, but anyway.
Well, I'll take your word for
it. Good. Thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Brendan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lou.